Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a word that is absolutely everywhere. Seriously, you might see it on a fancy restaurant menu promising a deconstructed cheesecake, or you might hear it in a deeply personal conversation about a friend going through a faith deconstruction. It has become a massive, unavoidable part of our modern vocabulary. But here is the core mystery we're going to unravel today. We use this term constantly in pop culture, but what does it actually mean at its philosophical roots? Like, what does it truly mean to deconstruct something? Okay, let's dive right into this. We're taking a highly structured journey through this concept today, starting with 1. What is deconstruction? 2. The illusion of meaning. 3. The metaphysics of presence. 4. Aporia, the textual impasse. 5. Escaping the ivory tower, and finally, number 6, the critics strike back. Starting off with section 1, what is deconstruction? Defining the undefinable. To find the actual origin of this concept, we have to look back to the French philosopher Jacques Derrida. He formalized the idea in his 1967 book of grammatology. But well, here's the catch, and it's a big one. He notoriously defined his concept by what it is not. Through his negative definitions, he argued that deconstruction is not a method because you can't just mechanically apply it like a checklist. It's not a critique because standard critiques rely on the very dogmatic language that deconstruction is trying to escape. And it's not an analysis because there are no self-sufficient units of meaning that you can just neatly break apart. Derrida resisted traditional definitions for a reason. He felt that treating it as a standard tool relies on the exact structural dogmas it seeks to dismantle in the first place. Let's move to section 2, the illusion of meaning. Saussure, structuralism, and difference. So to really understand Derrida, we have to look at the mechanics of language that he was actively reacting against. He was heavily influenced by the linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, who pioneered structuralism. Now, structuralism basically says language is a static system where words get their meaning based on how they differ from other words. But Derrida, he took this a massive step further. While structuralism saw a nice, neat, distinct system, deconstruction argues that meaning is literally never fully present. It's entirely fluid, it's highly unstable, and it is endlessly deferred to other signs. And that brings us to the very engine of deconstructive thought, difference, with an A. It's a really clever pun coined by Derrida that combines difference and deferment. It essentially means that a word only generates meaning by its difference from other words, and because of this infinite looping chain, a complete meaning is always postponed. You can literally never perfectly pin a word down to an absolute standalone essence. Let's look at a super relatable analogy to clear this up. Think about the word house. How do you actually know what a house is? Well, structurally, it only holds its meaning because it is not a shed, and it is not a mansion, right? I mean, when exactly does a big house become a mansion? The meaning is entirely reliant on this continuous shifting contrast with other words, rather than some magical, inherent houseness just floating out there in the universe. Words only work by bouncing off of what they aren't. Which takes us to section 3, the metaphysics of presence, dismantling violent hierarchies. Here is where Derrida starts targeting the entire history of Western philosophy. He argued that it has this deep historical bias he called logocentrism, basically the intense desire for immediate access to meaning and the privileging of presence over absence. According to Derrida, classical philosophy loves to set up what he famously called violent hierarchies. These are binary pairs where one side unfairly governs or dominates the other. Think about it. Placing speech over writing, the intelligible over the sensible, or male over female. Deconstruction actively seeks to expose and completely overturn these unexamined binaries. And this leads us to what is probably one of the most famously misunderstood quotes in modern philosophy, Il n'y a pas de hors texte, which is usually translated as, there is no outside text. People often mistakenly think Derrida meant that physical reality doesn't exist and only words are real. No way, that's not it at all. What he actually meant is that context is inescapable. We can never step completely outside the complex web of language, signs, and context to just magically grasp a pure, unmediated truth. Everything we understand is shaped by the text of our systems of meaning. Next up, section 4, aporia, the textual impasse, when texts undermine themselves. Let's look at how this applies directly to reading. The term aporia comes from Greek, and it means a philosophical puzzle or impasse. In deconstruction, aporia is that fascinating point of undecidability. It is the exact moment a text accidentally dismantles its own philosophical system. It's the gap between what a text wants to say and what the strict structure of language actually forces it to mean. Take Derrida's brilliant analysis of the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau argued passionately for the pure innocence of nature as opposed to the total corruption of culture. But Derrida went in and revealed the aporia. He showed that Rousseau's sense of pure innocence in nature is only defined through the lens of culture. The very concept of culture already infects and corrupts his argument about pure nature. The text's internal logic just completely undermines itself. Moving on to Section 5, Escaping the Ivory Tower, Deconstruction in the Real World. So how in the world did this highly complex academic theory break into the mainstream? Well, the seeds were planted way back in the 1880s when Friedrich Nietzsche began questioning the illusion of complete human reason. Then, in the 1920s, Martin Heidegger explored the concept of destruction, basically dismantling traditional concepts. 1967 is the big explosion. Derrida publishes Of Grammatology. By the 70s, it's championed by heavyweight literary critics at the Yale School. But look at how it evolves from there. By the 1990s, Spanish chef Ferran Adria is literally inventing deconstructed cuisine. And fast forward to the 2020s, the term has been heavily co-opted to describe personal journeys of critically examining religious beliefs. It's spread like wildfire. And the reason why this matters today is that the impact is truly interdisciplinary. In law, the critical legal studies movement uses it to expose intuitive, binary biases, things like public versus private in legal texts. It's forced historians to completely rethink historical practice and how we view sources. In feminism, it heavily influenced the brilliant Indian scholar Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak in her critical theory work. In cuisine, like we mentioned, it sparked the radical reimagining of classic dishes down to minimalist components. And in religion, it gives people a framework to rigorously examine their belief systems. It is an absolutely profound tool for revealing how the systems around us are built. Finally, Section 6, The Critics Strike Back, Hostility and Misunderstandings. Now, as with any massive, paradigm-shifting theory, not everyone was on board. One of the most famous clashes was the 1970s debate between Derrida and analytical philosopher John Searle regarding speech act theory. Searle focused hard on the sender's clear intention and a solid framework of linguistic normativity. Derrida, on the other hand, argued that intention is heavily restricted by past context and language constraints. The whole exchange became famously hostile, with both philosophers accusing the other of entirely misunderstanding their basic points. It was your classic heavyweight clash between continental and analytical philosophical traditions. And, Searle wasn't the only critic. Jürgen Habermas, another major thinker, strongly criticized what he saw as Derrida's opposition to rational discourse and his over-reliance on etymology. Then, in the 1990s, the infamous Sokal affair really heightened popular media criticism of post-structuralist thought, basically painting it as needlessly obscure. And in the early days of cyberspace conferences, figures like Chip Morningstar literally heckled deconstructionists off stages, arguing the whole framework was just epistemologically challenged. So yeah, the pushback has definitely been as fierce as the theory itself. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. Deconstruction isn't just some abstract academic exercise. It's a really profound lens for interrogating the structures all around us. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. If every text, every system of meaning contains the seeds of its own undoing, what unexamined hierarchies are hiding in the words you use every single day? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.